Have you ever wondered how far the boundary truly is between a genius admired by millions and a penniless outcast forsaken by society? For Julian Vance, that boundary did not span a year, a month, or even a single day. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of absolute arrogance, 3 seconds of a defiant stomp on the gas pedal, and 3 seconds of a contemptuous glare directed at a poor old street sweeper on the chilly streets of Chicago. Just those 3 fleeting seconds were enough to incinerate his entire empire of fame, fortune, and a future worth billions of dollars, turning everything to ash in a single, fateful winter morning. This is not merely a costly lesson about the price of hubris, but a profound story about karma, destiny, and the true value of a human being in a world that has grown far too accustomed to measuring compassion by the thickness of a wallet. That morning, Chicago welcomed a harsh wave of cold air. The sky was an immense, slate-gray canvas filled with the heavy dust of towering skyscrapers. The storm from the previous night had just passed, leaving behind massive, dark puddles on Michigan Avenue, a murky mixture of rainwater, motor oil, mud, and urban waste. Amidst the tense, silent, and biting atmosphere of the early dawn, a terrifying roar ripped through the air. It was the ferocious engine of a bright red Ford Mustang, a dazzling, aggressive red that symbolized insatiable ambition, vanity, and an overgrown ego. The car sped forward like an arrow, heading directly toward the Sterling Vanguard financial tower, the ultimate symbol of global economic power. It was a skyscraper of glass and steel where every square inch reeked of wealth and million-dollar contracts. Right in front of the main entrance, where a large puddle reflected the proud, towering image of the trillion-dollar skyscraper, an old street sweeper in an orange protective suit was quietly working. He was up there in years, his sparse hair silvered and blown by the icy wind, his face deeply etched with the marks of time and the heavy burdens of a long, difficult life. He was bending down, his thin, rough hands gripping the handle of his broom, diligently sweeping away the debris left by the storm to ensure a clean path for the high society executives who would soon arrive. But the red Ford Mustang showed no sign of slowing down. On the contrary, the engine roared even more violently as it neared the entrance. The driver seemed determined to use the speed of his supercar to assert absolute dominance, forcing any small, ordinary soul on the street to scramble out of his way. A horrific screech of tires rang out, but it was too late. The car tore through the muddy puddle at a dangerous speed. A murky downpour of filth, oil, and city grime splattered into the air, tracing a grim curve before raining down from head to toe onto the old man's orange suit. The world seemed to slow down for a long, agonizing moment. Filthy drops streamed down the old man's face, soaking into the worn fabric of his uniform, adding weight to a shoulder already heavy with the hardships of life. Yet, the old man did not flinch, nor did he yell in anger or chase after the vehicle with curses. He stood there, motionless like an ancient bronze statue in the heart of frozen Chicago, letting the stranger's utter rudeness wash away the last vestiges of his morning composure. The car door swung open with a proud scissor motion. Stepping out of the luxurious cabin was a young man whose appearance seemed tailor-made for the fashion magazines of successful billionaires. His hair was perfectly gelled back, without a single strand out of place. He wore a custom-made navy blue 3-piece suit, paired with Italian leather shoes so gleaming they could be used as mirrors. His name was Julian Vance, a rising star, a phenomenon, a financial prodigy of Wall Street. Despite his youth, Julian was already nicknamed the Boneless Shark for his ruthlessness, cold efficiency, and absolute precision in corporate takeovers. To Julian, the world operated on a very simple and cruel philosophy. The strong rule with money, and the poor are merely lazy failures who deserve to be cast out. Julian stepped onto the pavement, but his first action was not to check if the old man was hurt, nor did he offer the basic courtesy of a civilized human being. Instead, his eyes darted to the tips of his expensive leather shoes. Discovering a tiny speck of dirty water on the pristine leather, his handsome face instantly contorted in utter disgust, as if he had just looked at a repulsive parasite that should not exist in the sight of a high-class gentleman. He snapped his head up, his eyes flashing with anger, staring at the street sweeper with unbridled contempt. Julian barked, his voice sharp, arrogant, and loud enough to echo across the plaza. He berated the old man with venomous words, blaming him for blocking the path and screaming that his cheap, germ-filled suit had almost scratched the exclusive paint on his supercar. Julian had at his chin, asking the old man if he even knew how much the car was worth, and whether a lifetime of sweeping garbage and collecting pennies would ever be enough to pay for a single scratch on his wheel. To Julian, the very presence of poor manual laborers at the entrance of this magnificent tower was a stain on its prestige. Faced with the young man's explosive arrogance and insults, the old street sweeper slowly raised his rough, calloused hand to wipe away the dirty water from his cheek. His eyes showed no fear, no timidity of a low-status worker facing power and wealth. Instead, his deep blue eyes were eerily still and profound, a stillness like the surface of a deep lake before a massive storm, seemingly seeing right through the glamorous exterior to the hollow core of the young man's soul. The old man spoke calmly, his voice weathered by the wind, but remarkably clear and dignified. He explained that the young man had driven through the puddle at a dangerous speed, nearly causing an accident, and that a sincere apology wouldn't be too expensive for someone of his education, status, and elegant attire. Hearing the word apology, Julian scoffed out loud. It was a laugh filled with the utter contempt of the upper class for those they considered the absolute bottom of society, invisible, worthless entities. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his thick crocodile leather wallet. With 2 fingers wearing diamond rings, he pinched a crumpled, dirty $5 bill and carelessly tossed it onto the asphalt, right into the muddy puddle at the old man's feet. Julian leaned closer, letting the strong scent of his expensive cologne overpower the dusty smell of the road, and whispered Trinitarian words into the old man's ear. He told the old man to take the $5, vanish from his sight, and find a second-hand shop on the west side to buy a cleaner suit. Julian emphasized that his time was worth thousands of dollars a minute, and that he had no time to stand here arguing with an anonymous street sweeper. He warned the old man that the next time he saw the red Ford Mustang, he had better be smart enough to get out of the way, rather than letting his rags and poverty tarnish the path of those who hold the future of the country's financial destiny in their hands. With that, Julian turned his back and walked away, the sharp clicking of his leather heels on the pavement sounding triumphant and proud, like a general leaving a one-sided battlefield. He did not bother to look back, and because of that, he missed a crucial fact. The old street sweeper had absolutely no intention of bending down to pick up that filthy $5 bill. He remained standing exactly where he was, his distant gaze following the retreating figure of the most promising candidate for the CEO position of his own corporation. In those deep blue eyes, there was no anger or hatred, but a vast, profound sadness and utter disappointment. The old man was not saddened by his personal humiliation, for he had lived long enough to know that a person's dignity does not depend on the words of an arrogant fool. He was saddened by the realization that behind that expensive suit lay an empty soul, a rotten character, and that within his glass and steel tower, a toxic virus of arrogance was attempting to infiltrate and corrupt his entire empire. He whispered to the howling Chicago wind, wondering how long that young man's future could possibly last when its foundation was built on the trampling and contempt of his fellow human beings. Less than 30 minutes later, on the 88th floor of the Sterling Vanguard Tower, the atmosphere in the Supreme Conference Room was incredibly solemn and suffocating. This was the sanctuary where decisions capable of shaking global financial markets were made, where 12 board members, the most formidable minds in the industry, sat in silence, awaiting the arrival of the top candidate. The massive oak doors, beautifully carved and weighing hundreds of pounds, swung open. Julian Vance entered with the air of a king about to claim his throne, a man completely confident that the world was created solely to serve his genius. His attire was flawlessly adjusted, the speck of dirt on his shoe wiped clean, and his face radiated an arrogant smile, ready to conquer his new peak. Julian walked up to the podium, beginning his presentation with powerful macroeconomic terms, impressive growth charts, and a corporate strategy so ruthless it made some people shudder. Julian's plan was simple: to maximize shareholder profits and drive the corporation's stock price to record heights. The first step was to eliminate social welfare funds, cut health insurance for tens of thousands of factory workers, lay off long-serving employees, and replace them with automation. He emphasized coldly that a financial corporation is not a charity, and they could not let weak compassion slow down the march of profit. He claimed the poor and unpromotable were a burden on the economy, and the only way to optimize the system was to discard them. Julian scanned the room, expecting nods of approval and applause for his decisiveness. As he predicted, a few board members began to whisper, visibly impressed by his audacity. Julian smiled triumphantly and turned his gaze toward the chairman's chair, the luxurious leather seat at the center of the room, which had been facing away from the door since the beginning of the meeting, overlooking the panoramic view of Chicago. And then, the most terrifying turning point of Julian's life occurred. The chairman's chair slowly rotated around. Julian's world completely crumbled in an instant. The confident smile on his lips froze, his eyes widened to their absolute limits, and his pupils constricted as if he had just seen a monster from his worst nightmares. All the blood drained from his handsome face in a split second, leaving his skin as gray as ash and his lips trembling without a sound. Sitting in that chair of supreme power, the seat that held the destiny of a global financial empire, was not an unfamiliar tycoon, but the very street sweeper from this morning. It was the exact same face, etched with the harsh marks of time and weather. Those same deep blue eyes, eerily still, seemed to pierce through every glamorous mask to see the rot within his soul. But now, he was no longer wearing the dirty orange suit. He wore a simple white silk shirt without a tie, yet the regal aura and natural authority emanating from him made the vast room feel incredibly suffocating. Every board member held their breath in total silence. Julian stammered, his knees shaking so violently he could barely stand. The sharp, arrogant voice of the Wall Street financial genius was reduced to a choked groan. He could not believe his eyes, repeatedly wondering how a filthy street sweeper could occupy the supreme chairman's seat of Sterling Vanguard. Chairman Arthur Sterling did not interrupt Julian. He maintained a powerful silence, then slowly raised his rough hand to the marble table. He gently placed down a small, crumpled, and muddy object. It was the $5 bill Julian had tossed into the puddle earlier. Arthur spoke, his voice deep and warm, but as cold as the winter wind from Lake Michigan. He told Julian that he had a wonderful memory for profit figures, but a terrible memory for human relations. He pushed the $5 bill toward Julian and said that no designer suit, no expensive watch in the world could conceal the poverty, rach-ruoi, and deplorable state of his character and soul. Julian panicked completely. He realized he had made a fatal mistake that could bury his entire life. Stripping away his previous arrogance, Julian took a step forward, his tone shifting from panic to desperate pleading. He tried to claim it was merely a minor misunderstanding on the street, a spontaneous reaction caused by the immense stress of a life-or-death interview. Julian begged, arguing that the board could not possibly dismiss his brilliant talent and perfect business plan, one capable of bringing billions of dollars in profit, over such a trivial matter. Chairman Arthur Sterling slowly stood up. He did not slam the table, nor did he raise his voice, but the way he leaned forward, fixing his deep blue eyes onto Julian's pupils, completely subdued the young man. Arthur Dong DAC declared the ultimate principle of the corporation, that at Sterling Vanguard, ability never, and would never, be allowed to precede character. He stated that when Julian saw a street sweeper, he only saw rubbish at his feet. But to Arthur, the street sweeper was the solid foundation, keeping society clean and orderly. If a man like Julian could not learn to respect the people who clean the path he walks every day, then he would never be qualified or worthy to lead the people who are building that path day and night. Arthur picked up the dirty $5 bill, thrusting it directly at Julian's pale face, and told him to take his artificial future and leave. This tower is tall, yes, but it was built with the sweat, tears, and kindness of decent people, not as a sanctuary for selfish, arrogant individuals who look down on life. Julian stood motionless like a log. Everything around him suddenly became blurry and meaningless. The red Ford Mustang in the garage, his valedictorian degree, his reputation as a Wall Street genius. all of it felt like a ridiculous joke. He realized a harsh truth. The moment he triumphantly tossed that $5 bill into the dirty puddle, he wasn't throwing money to an old street sweeper. He was throwing away his honor, his career, his future, and the very life he had longed to build. Julian left the meeting room, his steps unsteady like a walking corpse. The expensive silk tie around his neck now felt like a noose, suffocating him. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him with a dry bang, like thunder ending all the fleeting illusions of a lifetime. As Julian walked down the glass hallway, the office workers who just hours before had looked at him with admiration and envy now bowed their heads, staring at their computer screens. They tried to avoid his gaze as if it were a contagious disease, because the news of the genius's downfall had already spread through the tower like wildfire. Julian walked in absolute solitude, surrounded only by the coldness and critical whispers of a high society he had once idolized. While Julian Vance was walking through the hell of despair, a completely different story, one filled with the warmth of human kindness, was unfolding in the chairman's office. Arthur stood by the giant window, silently watching Chicago as the last rays of daylight faded, giving way to a deep purple twilight. There was no joy or triumph on the old billionaire's face. Instead, he felt a gentle sadness, the heavy burden of a leader searching for a spark of true kindness to entrust the future of his empire. Hearing a timid knock from behind, Arthur did not turn around. He simply said, "Come in." The door opened, but this time there was no proud clicking of leather heels. Instead, the hesitant, timid footsteps of a middle-aged man in an orange protective suit entered, an outfit that perfectly mirrored the one Arthur had worn that morning. The man was Elias Miller, a true street sweeper who had silently cleaned the streets of the Loop District for 15 years without a single day off. Elias stood near the door, his scratched, Sun Tzu helmet clutched tightly in his hands. His rough hands were weathered by the cold wind and calloused from years of hard labor. He looked around the opulent room in utter astonishment. Elias spoke, his voice trembling with worry, asking if he had made any mistakes during his morning shift that displeased the chairman. Chairman Arthur Sterling slowly turned around. In that moment, a warm, radiant, and genuine smile appeared on the billionaire's aged, stern face. A smile that people like Julian, despite spending millions of dollars, would never have the chance to see. Arthur stepped closer, the distance in status between the wealthiest man in the city and an impoverished street sweeper completely disappearing as Arthur placed a warm hand on Elias's trembling shoulders. He looked into Elias's eyes and said with emotion that Elias was called up here because he was the only one who did the right thing that morning. Arthur recounted how, when the young man's car splashed dirty water all over him, everyone else just stood watching, laughing, and turning away indifferently as if he were invisible. But Elias was the only one who dropped his broom and ran to help. Elias had used his own clean towel to wipe away the dirt, shared his only bottle of warm water, and comforted him, saying that the city can be as cold as the wind on Lake Michigan, but poor working people should show compassion for each other. Elias scratched his head awkwardly, his sun-tanned face turning red. He smiled gently and simply said it was just a normal thing anyone with a conscience would do. Seeing an old colleague in trouble, how could he look away? We are all human beings working hard to earn a living, so helping each other is no big deal. But Arthur shook his head, his eyes shining with absolute determination. He asserted that not everyone thinks and acts that way. A man wearing a suit worth a year's salary from Elias was willing to throw a $5 bill into a puddle to humiliate someone, while Elias, earning only $15 an hour, was willing to share his only bottle of warm water with a stranger. Sterling Vanguard did not need more cold, selfish financial geniuses who only knew how to maximize profits by trampling on others. It needed someone who understood the true value of sharing a bottle of water in the cold wind. To Elias's utter amazement, Chairman Arthur Sterling announced his official appointment as the executive director of Sterling Vanguard's Global Philanthropy Fund, complete with a senior executive salary, corporate vehicle, and housing. Elias's eyes blurred with tears, and his hard hat nearly fell to the floor. He stood frozen, tears of a man who had experienced too much bitterness and injustice in life suddenly welling up and rolling down his weathered face. Elias had never dreamed of a luxurious office or a high position. His greatest dream was simply to have enough money to pay for his wife's chronic kidney dialysis 3 times a week and to pay for his eldest daughter's college tuition so she wouldn't have to drop out. Elias stammered, his voice choked with emotion, asking how a street sweeper who knew nothing about business management or complex numbers could shoulder such a great responsibility. Arthur Sterling smiled and interrupted him, explaining that Elias's job at this charity wasn't to sit in an air-conditioned office reading soulless reports. His job was to travel across the country, using his keen eyes and compassionate heart to find kind people who were silently contributing to society but were overlooked and trampled upon by the world. Elias would be the one to give them opportunities on Arthur's behalf, ensuring that no kindness is overlooked. As for technical matters and numbers, the best assistants and experts would support him. Elias only needed to manage the fund with one thing: his heart. Arthur added with a witty tone that Elias wouldn't need to walk to work tomorrow. The corporation had already prepared a car, and of course, his driver would never speed through puddles. To fully understand why a trillion-dollar empire's chairman would strip away his status to sweep streets, we must rewind 3 months before that fateful morning. It was a dreary autumn afternoon, the last golden leaves being swept away on Michigan Avenue. In his penthouse office, Arthur stood gazing at a portrait of his late wife, Eleanor. She was not a refined lady of high society, but a volunteer nurse he had met during his impoverished youth, when he was a penniless young man trying to find his way. It was Eleanor who taught him the most important lesson of his life, that a man's true wealth lies not in his bank account, but in the values, smiles, and kindness he leaves behind for the world before closing his eyes. As Arthur grew wealthy, surrounded by sycophants who saw him not as a human being, but as a gold mine to exploit, he realized a bitter truth. When he expressed his desire to find a successor who would run Sterling Vanguard according to the humanistic values he cherished, the board presented him with a long list of candidates, the most prominent of whom was Julian Vance. Julian was a financial phenomenon with a genius IQ, having successfully executed massive mergers. However, when Arthur sat alone in the dark reading Julian's strategic development plan for the corporation, he shuddered with a cold chill. The plan was beautifully presented but filled with soulless numbers. Julian proposed cutting health insurance for tens of thousands of factory workers, closing educational support funds for poor employees' children, and tie older workers to maximize shareholder profits. Specifically, in the introduction, Julian wrote a sentence Arthur could never forget. The poor and weak are a burden that hinders economic growth. A great corporation cannot be run by those with weak compassion. Cruelty is the key to optimization. This very statement spurred Arthur to conduct a bold experiment. He wanted to know what kind of look Julian would give him if he stripped away his billionaire status and the power of money, appearing before him as a poor street sweeper at the bottom of society. Arthur staked the entire future of his corporation on this trip, a trip his closest aides tried to prevent, warning him that Chicago's winter streets were harsh and that dangers from homeless people or criminals could affect his health. But Arthur just smiled and said that the weather or criminals were not the most dangerous things. The most dangerous thing was the coldness, cruelty, and arrogance residing in the minds of those in fancy suits sitting high up in those skyscrapers. If he did not go down to the streets himself, he would never find a truly worthy soul. And so, Arthur stepped onto the streets. In the first few weeks, he had to learn to endure contemptuous stares and harsh words from strangers. Once, a group of drunken youths deliberately kicked over the trash he had spent an hour collecting, laughing hysterically at the sight of an old man bending down to pick up broken pieces in the dark night. Another time, a refined lady pulled her young child away when Arthur passed, pointing at him and telling the child that if he didn't study hard, he would end up sweeping garbage in shame like that old man. These experiences did not anger Arthur. They only deepened his sorrow for a society corrupted by materialism and practical philosophy. But amidst that gray and cold atmosphere, he met Elias Miller. Elias was different. Seeing Arthur, a novice whose movements were still awkward, Elias proactively approached him. He kindly instructed Arthur on how to hold the broom to avoid back pain, how to recognize and avoid glass shards hidden under the snow, and shared simple stories about his life. Through brief conversations during their short breaks, Arthur learned of Elias's dire circumstances. His wife suffered from severe chronic kidney disease requiring dialysis 3 times a week, consuming his entire meager salary. His eldest daughter was bright and had just received an acceptance letter from a prestigious university, but he faced the prospect of making her drop out because he couldn't afford the tuition. Despite bearing such a heavy family burden and facing life's harsh treatment, Elias never complained or lost his gentle smile. He continued to work diligently and diligently. On snowy days, Elias would still bend down to pick up fallen chicks from their nests to warm them in his hands, and he readily gave his only sandwich to a homeless person huddled in hunger on a street corner. Elias once told Arthur a sentence the billionaire engraved in his mind: "We can be poor in money and possessions, but we cannot be poor in kindness. Life is already hard enough. If humans don't know how to love and protect one another, the coldness of human hearts is even more terrifying than a Chicago winter." These sincere, mock-mack words from the poor street sweeper ignited a spark of hope in Arthur Sterling's heart. He knew he had found the precious gem he had been searching for, a gem not found in luxurious showrooms, but hidden within an orange protective suit covered in street dust. After that fateful day on the 88th floor of the Sterling Vanguard Tower, the story of Arthur Sterling's experiment was no longer just an internal anecdote. It transformed into a wave, a powerful wake-up call that spread with lightning speed throughout the offices, trading floors, and the entire city of Chicago. It appeared on the front pages of major newspapers, becoming a subject of lively discussion from sidewalk cafes to high society banquets. The effect of the story was so profound that it completely altered the behavior and perception of an entire community. Executives and financial managers, who previously arrogantly walked past janitors and security guards without a glance, began to change their attitude. They started stopping to greet, smile, and thank the people who silently served and maintained their work environment. A wave of changing perceptions about the value of manual labor and human equality was sparked, beginning with the courageous and humane act of an anonymous billionaire. For Julian Vance, the days that followed were a long series of torment, humiliation, and utter loneliness. The bright red Ford Mustang, once his pride and symbol of success, turned into a burden, a symbol of shame. Every time the engine roared, it served as a nagging reminder of the fatal mistake he had made. Wherever Julian went, he was met with critical glances, pointing fingers, and whispers of contempt from colleagues and society. Former business partners who had eagerly courted him now turned their backs, refusing calls, ignoring emails, and canceling appointments. Julian realized a harsh truth about the elite world he had idolized, that it was incredibly cruel and practical. They would praise you to the skies when you were at the top, but were ready to trample and forget you when you fell. In his luxurious but empty penthouse, Julian spent hours sitting in the dark, staring at the dirty $5 bill he had picked up from the boardroom like a bitter treasure. He began to question the values his strict father had taught him, the ruthless philosophy of life that viewed the world as only hunters and prey. It was a painful collapse of perception, a severe mental crisis, but perhaps from the shattered ruins of that arrogant ego, a seed of repentance, a green shoot of compassion had a chance to sprout and take root in the soul of a young man who had once lost his way. In stark contrast to Julian's solitude and bitterness, Elias Miller's new life was filled with laughter, happiness, and sacred values. On his first day in his new office as CEO of the charity foundation, Elias did not wear expensive suits. He chose polite, simple, but neat and clean attire. On his luxurious wooden desk, next to stacks of multi-million-dollar charity project files, Elias placed a very special object, the scratched orange work helmet he had worn for 15 years. Elias placed it there as a reminder to himself that no matter the circumstances, no matter how high his position, he must never forget his origins, never forget his fellow workers who were still diligently sweeping the streets in the biting cold. The first project Elias implemented was not a lavish sponsorship program for large organizations to gain notoriety for the corporation. He established a scholarship fund named Light from Kindness, specifically for the children of sanitation workers, room service staff, and underprivileged manual laborers across the city. Elias personally sat in the corporate vehicle, traveling to every street corner, and dilapidated boarding house to deliver these scholarships to children. He wanted to bring the light of knowledge and a chance to change their destiny, just as Chairman Arthur Sterling had saved his family from the dark mire. Elias's wife, after being transferred to a top hospital with excellent medical care and full funding, showed a miraculous improvement in her health. Her face no longer looked pale and tired from pain. Instead, she wore a radiant smile, seeing her husband and children no longer living in daily poverty and anxiety. Elias's eldest daughter confidently entered university, filled with pride in her father. Every weekend, Elias drove his spacious family car, taking his wife and children for walks in the park or trips to new lands they had previously only seen on television. He no longer had to wake up at 4 in the morning in the biting cold, but his habit of rising early remained unchanged. Every morning, Elias woke up early, brewed a pot of hot tea, stood by the window looking down at the street, and silently thanked life, thanking Nye Arthur Sterling for trusting him and giving him the opportunity to beautify life in a greater way. Arthur Sterling, in the final years of his life, finally found true and complete peace of mind. He knew he had made the right decision for the future of the Sterling Vanguard Corporation. His financial empire was now not just an efficient money-making machine, but had become a lighthouse of social responsibility, love, and compassion for humanity. Under Elias's heart-driven leadership, the corporation's charitable activities brought profound, positive changes to the community, helping tens of thousands of underprivileged people regain faith and hope in life. Arthur frequently accompanied Elias to impoverished rural areas and slums to witness firsthand the happy smiles and tears of gratitude from the people receiving assistance. He realized a profound truth, that the joy of seeing a poor child get a chance to go to school, the happiness of saving a human life, was 100 times greater and more meaningful than seeing the figures in his bank account increase every day. Imagine a beautiful spring morning, when the first warm rays of sunshine begin to melt away the last vestiges of Chicago's harsh winter frost. On the streets of the Loop District, sanitation workers are still diligently and seen going about their work. But they are no longer lonely, invisible, or cold-shouldered. They receive warm greetings and respectful nods from passing office workers and elegant citizens. The story of the billionaire street sweeper and the CEO who stepped out of kindness turned Chicago into a warmer city, where human connection triumphed over the coldness of concrete and steel walls. And on the rooftop of the Sterling Vanguard Tower, Arthur Sterling and Elias Miller stand together by the glass window. They do not look down on life with contempt or trick thwong. They are gazing towards the distant horizon where the city lights are beginning to illuminate new hopes for a brighter tomorrow. Their story will be told forever, a powerful testament that in a world filled with $3,000 suits and cold profit figures, love, respect, and kindness between people remain the warmest flame, illuminating the path to true and lasting happiness. As this video draws to a close, I hope that the humanistic, profound messages from the story of Sir Arthur Sterling, Julian Vance, and Elias Miller have left an indelible impression on your mind and heart. Life is short and fragile. Things like money, fame, status, or luxurious supercars are fleeting. External entities that can easily disappear in the blink of an eye, just as the financial genius Julian lost everything in a single morning. The only thing that endures, the thing that truly defines who you are, is your character, your morality, and the seeds of kindness you sow in this world. Money can buy an expensive suit, but it cannot buy a noble soul. Money can buy a luxury watch, but it can never buy genuine respect from those around you. Therefore, please remind yourself never to let the allure and power of money blind your eyes of reason, and never let arrogance or self-complacency harden your heart. Always learn to listen, understand, share, and show absolute respect to everyone around you, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they do. Because each of us is an important link in this vast world, and no one is invisible, no one is worthless in the eyes of fate and destiny. If you felt this video provided you with meaningful moments and strengthened your belief in the good things in life, please don't hesitate to give us a like. That is a priceless recognition for the silent efforts of our editorial team. Click the subscribe button and the notification bell icon next to it to be among the first to watch our next heartwarming stories and profound life lessons. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue spreading positive values and humanistic messages to the community. Now, please take a few minutes to reflect and leave your comments below. What do you think of Sir Arthur Sterling's decision? If you were in Julian Vance's shoes in that meeting room, what would you do to correct your mistake and save your honor? And do you believe that in today's modern society, kindness still receives its deserved rewards, just as Elias Miller did? Share this story with your family and friends as a meaningful spiritual gift, a gentle reminder of the value of love and respect in everyday life. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to watch this entire video. Goodbye and see you again in the next stories on our channel. Wishing you and your family peace, happiness, and a heart full of kindness.